Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Peggy-Sue Khumalo as we continue with our A Woman Belongs series. So if you missed part 1, click the link on your screen right now. Don't miss a beat. You don't want to miss this conversation. And without any further ado, let's get straight into it.
In 2018, and I want to track back to just the dynamics of being first this, first that. In 2018, you were appointed as the first Black woman CEO for the wealth division at Standard Bank. And prior to that, you were third Black woman to be crowned Miss SA during such a very important time also in the history of South Africa, right? Yeah. What are your thoughts on this pressure and this titling that we put around the first Black this or the first Black woman this? What are your thoughts around this attachment of numbers and titles and the pressure and the staging that happens around us as Black women, especially?
If I can just say to you, it is one of the things that I completely unsubscribe to. I don't buy in it. I think that, obviously we come from a country that has history and we need to acknowledge that history. We come from a country where really, if you look at every sphere of life, I think Black women have been given a raw deal. They're on the peripheries of everything. They're on the margins of everything. We have to fight so much harder for everything that we feel we deserve. In corporate, in banking, we even called, names like, angry Black women, who are always coming in and they're fighting, everything feels like it's a fight and everything feels like you have to break down so much for you to actually, be heard and to be listened to. And so I suppose, even at Investec, it happened. I was the first Black female to sit on the exco of the South African, business. And so all this time, and for me, I listened to it and I thought, okay, I need to acknowledge that we come from a history as a people. But at the same time, when is this first this ever going to stop? Because it does create massive expectations, and it puts one under a lot of unnecessary pressure because you've got pressure any day, anyway, every day that you show up. And so one of the things for me that became important whenever I found myself in a space where you were looked at, as I would say, the poster child, you're the only one. I didn't feel any special about being the only one around the table. My main objective and focus was, how can I create room on the table? Somebody else can come and join me. How do I create space so that we make the circle bigger and make sure that more young people and more women are coming into Exco, are coming more into leadership positions? So that was my way of counteracting some of this. And we can easily get caught up. We can easily get caught up when you become somebody that everyone thinks, oh my gosh, he or she has arrived. And I'm always amazed at white people when they start telling you, oh my gosh, I love the way you speak. Where did you go to school? And you feel like, oh my gosh.
You speak so well.
Yeah, you speak so, and I'm like, what are you saying about the rest of my colleagues, And so for me, I think I just took that and I thought, this now gives me the influence, the power to make good, for the greater good, for the greater, universe of professionals, of women in these spaces. And so whenever I sat around the table, my thing was always about, how do I create space for other women? It might not be at the same table that I'm in, but the next table. And so if I look at my legacy at Standard Bank, my exco that I built, making sure that some of my young women were sitting on boards of businesses that were sitting within my business. So that is how I thought I have to create this space. At Investec, I did that in abundance. I made sure by the time I left, there were more women sitting in Exco, more Black men sitting in Exco, because they needed, to be around that table. And so it's always about, how do I then take on the responsibility, as hard as it is, and make sure that I just really expand the opportunities to other people, so that we don't then always find ourselves in spaces where you're the poster child. You're the poster child. That's it. You're the only one. You speak in a certain way. You rock up because you could also easily become a part of the institutionalized system, and then you start responding very badly to what shouldn't be. And I was really scared around that. I always didn't want to be in a space where now I'm also becoming a hindrance to my own community in the workplace. And so I think those are the things that I think matter most when you find yourself in a situation. Even the Miss South Africa, I mean, the fact that, I obviously was inspired by Jackie, inspired by Bassi, and it was great. And I think the person who carried the most brand on behalf of Black women in the Miss SA is Jackie. Jackie really did. I mean, she was abused literally by the public and the white public who just had the privilege to say what they wanted to say about how she looked, what they felt about her. And so when some of us walked in those shoes, it was a watered down version of what she was subjected to. I mean, I had my fair share of, issues, but I just think it was a watered down version of what Jackie went through. And so I have immense respect for her, and I love her to bits, because I think, she stood strong. And Tata Madiba tells me a story of even when, he took her to the east of Johannesburg, and when they got there, there was the old South African flag, and how she responded to that situation. I always say, wow, we've really had greatness in somebody like her, and she set the path for us. She really did. She really did.
You tell a story as well of Utata Madiba and you guys being around a table, and then a plate of prawns, right, arrives at the table. And you'd never seen a plate of prawns before that. The previous time you'd seen actually a plate of prawns was at your employer, when you were a domestic worker. You and your mom were domestic workers. That was the first time you'd seen a plate of prawns. It was the second time you'd seen a plate of prawns. And just how he humanized that moment for you, right? And just made you feel seen, and made you feel, he kind of helped you relax in that very moment. And I see that a lot in just the work that you do, and how you humanize the young men and women, the young Black men and women around you, and how, even when you feel a little bit of jitters or stress or anxiety. I hear a lot of young women and men that have been mentored directly or indirectly by you feel humanized, even in the mistakes or in the ways that they move. They're like, I was still human. I was still seen in that moment.
Yeah. And I think, I have not touched on, I think, some of the values that I got from Utata. And one of them, and I think for me, it's one of the greatest, because I think humility is also something that, we don't have in abundance as a people. And so humility and just, and Utata had a very special way of making people feel special, irrespective of who they are in the strata of society. So, that incident that you point to, or the experience that you talk about, was with Bill Clinton. I mean, you're sitting with the president of the United States, you're sitting with the current president of South Africa, and all I see is this chojos full on my plate, and I'm thinking, oh, I saw these things when Mama and I worked in Springs, but I didn't eat them. I think I remember saying to my mom, I can't touch these things, so you're going to touch them. And we both didn't know what they are. We actually had no idea. And then all of a sudden they're sitting in front of me, and I'm having all kinds of imaginations in my mind that if I touch it, it's going to probably pop out of my plate and jump onto somebody's plate, And I think Tata was just wow. I mean, the way he he helped me through that. And he wiped his bread knife, and he said, "Would this help?" And I was like, "No, it's not even about the cutlery that's being used. It's just this thing sitting in front of me." And he just called the waiter, told him to take it away and offer me something else, And I thought, wow, okay. And I used to watch him a lot. So I had the privilege and honor of traveling with him. And I remember we're in the Northern Cape. And when in fact, even at the state dinner with President Bill Clinton, when we got to Cape Town, it was in a massive marquee. And we got in, and President Clinton had arrived already, and Data and I arrived, and he took his time. And when I say somebody takes, when you take your time, he started with the waitresses. Everyone was so excited to see him. The waitresses, the chefs. He took his time. By the time he got to Bill, I thought, oh my gosh, he must be tired of speaking. And I thought, wow, there's so much power in that, because he didn't discriminate. It didn't matter who you are. You were all just so important. And he thanked them for, making sure that, we were having this event, thanked them for, having to, serve us until late in the night that evening. And I just thought, I sat there and I just was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. There's something to be, something to be learned here. And I think from that day forth, for me, irrespective of who you are, you can be a security guard. You can, I think also my own personal experiences have taught me that it doesn't matter who you are. You could be at your lowest today. Tomorrow you could wake up and be the greatest person that, you never envisaged yourself to be. And so respect for that is so fundamental as far as I'm concerned. And that is something that I think I really learned from Mutata, humility, and just really understanding that we're all human, we're all human, and we shouldn't judge each other. We shouldn't be harsh when it comes to how we deal with each other. And we're all there to make a difference, right? And uplift each other and pay it forward. And so whenever I get the opportunity to, pay it forward, that's what I do. That's what I do. Yeah.
My friend Zimasa wouldn't forgive me if I didn't ask a question that she asked me to ask you, and I told her that I'm going to be speaking to you. This is my best friend, Zimasa Mabuse.
Yeah.
So she says,
okay.
So she says, I must ask you, women are constantly encountering barriers to networking and also establishing the necessary connections to climb the corporate ladder within the banking industry. Even with the legislation and initiatives that have been put in place to mitigate the issue, you've been in the investing banking space for over 17 years. Are you concerned about the pace of transformation, particularly, in private banking, but also in the commercial banking space? But in the commercial banking, you've made great strides. But are you concerned about the pace of the transformation that is happening?
I am, and I think one of the things that I really lean into and try and champion is making sure that we create spaces for Black women professionals to really network, right? Because I think also networking doesn't come natural, and I've had to learn it over time. And we all know that business is done on the basis of who you know, right? So it's not that you got to be a genius and knock people off that your business idea will be the best business and therefore it's gonna go on and be great. I think it's done by who you know, and so I do feel that the sector could be doing so much more when it comes to gender equity. I know there have been strides that have been made, and I acknowledge that there's a lot of effort that has been put into it. But I think what concerns me is the fact that women don't champion each other. I feel that we should do more as women to champion each other, especially Black women. I do think that we need to call each other out. more when it comes to making sure that, we champion each other. When I'm sitting at the table, I shouldn't think, oh, Olwethu is a competition to me, I don't want her in around the table. In fact, she complements who I am, and I think that we all have our different strengths and abilities to lean into greatness. And the more you have around you, the better. And so I think there's very little to be said around how corporate is setting up the right platforms and the right opportunities for women to network, because the power of networking is incredible. It really is incredible, because I've also learned over my own career that when you don't have a sponsor, you really battle. And I was very privileged and blessed in that I had Mr. Stephen Kosov, who obviously was a mentor, ultimately became a sponsor. And so the fact that I was at his South African Business Expo for the time that I spent there, speaks to that sponsorship, the power of that sponsorship. And so I do think that we also need to call out our own Black male leaders who don't sponsor us, and actually create spaces where, when they're thinking of the next big move in terms of talent, that they consider Black women in that mix as well. And I think we need to challenge that a little bit more. And I think it's possible. I have seen it. It is possible. I don't really support the conversation when people talk about lack of skills. I don't think that it's a challenge around lack of skills. I think we've got skills in abundance. I think people are trained for the right jobs. I just think that institutional barriers and institutional sometimes discrimination just are some of the issues that we should address. I think there's also a lot to be said around just the belief in women leadership and what women leadership brings to a team, what women leadership brings to an organization. And also visibility, around other female leaders, like what are they doing to uplift? I always say, I believe truly in the principle of lifting as we rise. And one of the things that I've also said is that the elevator can't stay at the top. It needs to come down and so that it goes up again, so that when it comes down, it picks up and it goes up. And so I think women need to realize that unless we are all committed to the principle of lift as we rise, we need to take everyone with us. Without us doing that, we're not going to kind of see the kind of transformation, diversity and inclusion that we're looking to see. Because I think even from an inclusion perspective, you need to include different perspectives. You need to include different cultural, perspective. There's so much that we need to do. And so I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but it won't get done. And legislation, a legislative framework is one thing, but action and making sure that it happens is another thing. And I think that so many of us have gone into influential positions where we can actually influence and make sure that we champion transformation and champion diversity. And we've not done that for whatever reason that might be. And I think increasingly, I think we need to be bolder and more unapologetic around that. And I think I've tried to do that in the different roles that I've had. I've really, really leaned into my power of one and power of influence, and try to influence because it's all about influence. When you talk to someone sitting around the table who's looking for a particular leader because there's a space. If I believe that Olwethu is ready for the job and have this conversation, that person's going to listen to me. So it's not rocket science. It's actually conversation. You're having conversation peer to peer. You're opening up spaces in terms of let's open a space, let's create a space. But let's be clear that when we create that space, we are going to only look at, Black professionals for that role and not open it up as though we just want anyone that can walk through the door. We're going to be deliberate. We're going to be intentional. So there's no sometimes around these things, and it can be hugely frustrating, because I think at the end of the day, I know that when you in your career, it's all about your commercial benefit, but let's always think about the greater good. And I'm always good.
You touched on this earlier on, and I want to bring it up again, and I also want to get your perspective on it. So I started an organization called the Womanomics, and it was more about getting women, to be more economically included, because we are in the economic back foot, especially Black women. And we're far back in the line when it comes to wealth and financial education. And we know that Black women don't have a problem with making money. We're resourceful. We don't have we just don't have the long-term know-how on wealth creation, particularly. What are some crucial money skills that you learned at the beginning of your career, and how have they shifted now and molded into the idea of what the true actual meaning of money and wealth are for you?
Look, I think all of us come from a very low base, right? We hustle, and we hustle so well. I mean, we're good at that, right? And I think over time, I think learning about investments was quite a big step for me, because whether you had unit trust, you never really understood what is it. Like, okay, I've got you. What does it mean? And when you start getting into the detail of what some of these investment products are capable of doing, you start understanding. And I think also generally women are very risk averse, right? We're very risk averse. When you hear of somebody saying, you could put R1 million into this investment, you like thinking, oh my gosh, like what happens? I had R1 million, and then the next day it will all be gone, because, that's the nature of markets. And so I think over time, I've been very blessed in that I've had, and I'm glad to say, Black professionals that I've deliberately and intentionally wanted them to be my advisors and sort of my stockbrokers around what it is that I want to do with, my savings. Least we forget that we also have Black tax, which, by the way, I think is something that we all need to lean into, rather than, look at it as a
try
burden.
and avoid. Yes.
Yeah, and so over time, I think I've really learned the power. For me, it's more the power of saving and then investing, and I think that's where we need to really engender and encourage a nation that saves, because out of your savings you can then invest, and from those investments you can then start creating wealth, right? And so you can't create wealth and make investment decisions when you're not really saving. And that's why I mentioned that we all have come from a very low base. So we don't have trust funds. I mean, we don't come from families where you have trust funds. You've literally worked for everything that you've got in this lifetime. And so I do frown sometimes when some of our colleagues, you're driving your car and they make a comment about, oh my God, did you see she's driving, a Range Rover or whatever? It's like, you don't know where I come, it doesn't matter. I've worked for it. I didn't steal it. I didn't get a tender, kind of thing. So I do think that, for Black women, and that's what I also tried to do many of, is just having the conversations around wealth creation. How do we think around savings? How can we be more deliberate and intentional around how we save? Because over and above everything else, our children, our families, what is it? And we know the mechanisms. I mean, the biggest traditional mechanism has been through stokvels, right? When you come together as a club, you save money together. That for me is wealth creation right there. We just have not put that type of lens on it, right? And obviously, to the Western way of banking, it hasn't been a sexy kind of space. But trust me, right now, they are all scrambling for it because it's a massive industry. I think it's in the excess of 40 billion rands. And so it's a massive industry. So I think making sure that women have access to more conversations around just wealth creation, around savings, around different investment products. What does it mean? What does it mean when you save? Even products around saving for your children's education, products around fiduciary. I went through an experience when I lost my husband where estate planning, it's so critical. It is so critical. And as women, this is what we need to think about so we can have this conversation with our husbands and our partners around, look.
And it feels scary, especially around Black culture. Yeah. It's so scary because
exactly. Exactly. If they said that to me, even though they knew Guti, he had cancer for 2 long years, I mean, they still would say, right? So those are some of the things that I think we need to do more of, and we need to make it visible, and we need to, and I as well all the way to that. Some of this stuff we don't need banks to do it. If we've got professionals, in these spaces, and I think that's what Makwena and I spoke a lot about, is that beyond banking, what is it that we can offer to our communities? And I think we were thinking around,
and it's in those small. And I remember Makwena would say it's in the conversation, the intentional conversations that you have with your friends around tables. What conversations are you having at lunch when you are wining and dining and all that?
Exactly. And so myself and her had thought about this, and in fact, when she was acquiring the property in Midrand, where she wanted to turn it into an event kind of setup, we thought we could also offer those conversations, because we both had the privilege of understanding financial markets, understanding what we go through in terms of the conversations that we're having with the wealth managers that we find ourselves around, or that are around us, the stockbrokers that are there looking at different stocks and saying, look, if you invest in this product, and you have a 30% offshore, what does that mean for you and your portfolio? I mean, when I started banking, I knew nothing about the stock market. They'd never heard about it. And some of these concepts are very technical, and that's the thing. It's very technical as well. And so getting your head around it and trying to keep it as simple or vanilla as possible is also important. So if a banker comes to you and say, no, we could do a wrap and we can swap, you start thinking, no derivatives in my it's technical. But like, how many women are privileged to understand what derivatives means, what swaps? Dr. Judith Lamini was a client, or has been a client of mine for many years. And she used to always challenge me and say, when you guys come, you talk all this jargon. I don't understand it. Simplify it. Make it simple. I don't want my money and I wake up tomorrow and it's gone. And then you'll turn around and say, but we told you. And I didn't understand what you told me. And so I loved her for that, because she challenged us and she thought, don't think because you're talking to Adrian Gore about derivatives, you can come and apply the same to me, because I understand it. And until you make me understand and take me through the mechanics, I might consider. But still, I want something vanilla. I want something straightforward. And I want something that's going to build my wealth rather than take away from my wealth. And so those are some of the things that I think as Black women we need to lean into and stop setting it up for ourselves. I've decided about 3 weeks ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to put together a group of professionals, business leaders, entrepreneurs. Let's go out into the community and help amplify the vaccination drive. And I promise you, it's amazing. Like, the response has been humbling, and people speak of, I've not been in years, but my parents come from there. And I'm like, but we have to go back there. We need to go back there and start from the bottom up, where you're actually starting with an educational awareness piece, where you're talking to people about why they need to vaccine, what are the vaccines that are available, show empathy and be honest around what are the side effects. People want trust, and there's very limited circles of trust at the moment. And, and we can only be the only ones that change that and turn that around.
This then brings me to the question, being a woman executive and a mother yourself, with all its challenges and all its unique challenges, with the world's expectations of you, what has the pandemic and its agony taught you about the world around us right now? And most importantly, what has this pandemic taught you about yourself?
Look, I think it's been unprecedented times. But I think what has been, for me, so wonderful about some of the things that have come to the fore is just how women, I think in particular, have had to lean into their natural self to actually be leaders, because there was no playbook for this crisis, right? And so people have always relied on some manual in terms of how they connect with their teams, in terms of how to motivate their teams, in terms of how to show empathy. There's been no playbook, so there's been no leadership playbook in that regard. So you've actually had to show up and be your authentic self. And I think for me, it's sad that, again, the world has not put that into the spotlight in terms of just how brilliant women leaders have been during this time, because you've had to get up every day over and above the impact that COVID is having on you and your immediate family, and show up and motivate and give hope. And so the nurturing side, the caring side, the compassion, you've had to be very compassionate. I mean, people have lost family members, people have been completely disrupted, their worlds have been disrupted, your daily rituals and routines have been disrupted, and you've had to hold that together, not only for yourself at a personal level, but also for the teams that you're connecting with on a day-to-day basis. And so I think for me, it's been a very difficult time, and it's been brutal on many levels. But there's also been a beauty that I think maybe not enough spotlight has been shone on it, because I do think that if you had to do a survey around leadership, you would see that maybe the people that fared the best would probably be the female leaders, because we've had to lean into who we really are. And remember, those softer issues are the issues that corporate doesn't want, like, being vulnerable, being compassionate. It's always about the technical side, which we have. But I've always said you need to have a combination. Tata used to always say the combination of a heart and a mind and heart is so critical in anything that you do. You need to have the mind, but you also need to have the heart. And so we've had to bring our hearts, into a virtual environment, And so I think that for me has been something that really the world has missed, again, to recognize and honor and salute women in terms of how women have shown up. But I also think at a personal level, talking about the positive now, it's been quite a beautiful intersection of humanity and innovation, right? Where you had to really lean into evolving as a person. I mean, I've taken up digital courses where you needed to upskill yourself, because all of a sudden we're finding ourselves that we're thrust in a very completely different world to the world that we're used to. Making sure that you understand that the camera on this virtual world is actually your crown to the world, and how you show up every day. Some of my team members used to say, "Oh my gosh, you look so beautiful," just like we'd seen. And I actually have no choice, because if I don't get into a routine, I don't think I can make it. And so I needed to have a routine. I needed a routine for my children, because there was homeschooling as well all of a sudden. I needed a routine for my sanity. I needed a routine so that I can actually go out and run and exercise, because that was also equally important. And so that intersection of humanity and innovation for me has been quite powerful as well. In terms of just, wow, the disruption. I mean, for talk about loss, right? Talk about people feeling that they lost, their routine, their rituals. When COVID hit, I was 2 months into my mourning of Xolani Gwala's passing. And so it found us in a space of deep, deep, deep and great loss. And all of a sudden, you don't have an outlet. You can't see friends. You can't I couldn't see Umakwena, and cry and sit with her on a bed where we can cry until the next morning and we'll get up and feel good that, okay, we did that, but it's okay. It's still okay, And my children, I have so much respect for my two girls, the resilience and just the showing up every day on camera for them at school, knowing that they're carrying this pain. And all of a sudden, for me, at a personal level, I felt like I was seeing Xolani in our home. I was seeing him, I was feeling him, but I can't touch him. I can't be with him because he's not there, To the extent that I needed to decide, do we create a space and enshrine that space as our prayer corner where we honor him, put his pictures, put a candle, and that's what we get through. That's what I did, where we could go and the girls and would speak to him and would tell him what we're going through and would, just to get through. And I mean, I also felt that the corporate world, in a way, didn't acknowledge how difficult this transition was for everyone. They just took it for granted that you need to show up. We're now virtual. We're virtual. You need to show up. You need to present. And I was like, we're not giving people time to adjust. I was touching base with younger professionals more than anyone because I knew they are on their own, right? They're either renting a cottage, they're renting a flat, and you'd see, you'd literally,
the language was so palpable.
Yeah. So it was like the loneliness and how they were feeling was palpable, even though you're talking through a video camera. And so, I think COVID, it's taught me a lot around, again, I think the principle of humility, and also doing away with all the frills and thrills and just getting back to the basics, and that you can get by with the basics. You can get by with not having to do your nails and worrying about your nails and worrying about your hair. And just, you can get by with very little, with minimal, and still be okay and still be a human being. And I think for me, that humanity and bringing us together, each other more than we've ever been. So like that empathy was so important. But also at a community level, I think I was quite embarrassed that when you look at the social and how that was put into stark focus in terms of the inequalities in our society, and everyone was talking about digital, but it's not inclusive. Children were online. Their cousins in Newcastle couldn't go to school. And so I can't be okay with that they are continuing with their academic year, but their cousins whom they play with, but they can't do that. And so this focus on just inequalities and how we're not inclusive.
I made an analogy of, because we had the same situation, and I made an analogy of it's as if our leadership suddenly realized that their sibling had passed away and now they have to take in their siblings' children. And like, my children's year must go on, but like, until I figure out what I'm going to do and what extra budget I'm going to allocate to my siblings' children, Exactly. The last question I was going to ask you is, where to from here? What's your plan going forward? You mentioned that you just left Standard Bank.
So I think I want to build. I'm all about legacy building. I think even when it comes to wealth, we need to build legacies around what it is that we want our children to sort of lean into, and not be subjected to the same struggles and hardship that we have had to be subjected to. So I think I really believe that there's still so much to do when it comes to uplifting and really taking our communities with us, as and when we progress, and how we charter that and identify it and be intentional around it. I think has a lot to do with just us rethinking after the crisis, what is the South Africa that we want to see? The economy needs to be more inclusive. And so I can play a role around making sure that the economy will be more inclusive, making sure that Black businesses don't just remain ideas, but they actually are supported and they've got the right capital, and that, you know, they get into the right spaces in terms of making sure that, you know, they're having the right conversations with people. If I can play a role in facilitating that, what is the impetus? What is going to pull us together to make sure that, you know, the South Africa that we inherit post the crisis is a very different South Africa? And I want to play a very big role in that space. I'm very big on advocating for gender equity. I think you've heard that throughout the interview. And so what role I play on a Pan-Africa perspective, I think is going to be critical. I think there's some exciting things in the pipeline that I would share with you later, but one of them being a bank for women. And I'm working with this with friends of mine on the continent, where we want to build a digital bank for women, only for women, because I also do think that we need to own things that belong to us as women. And be intentional and spell it out, what it is that we want. And so I think that there's a big untapped market when it comes to understanding women's needs and understanding what women are looking for when it comes to banking. And so there's that, and I'm quite excited about it. There's the asset management piece, which I think is so fundamental to supporting Black women businesses. You know, and I think that the PIC should be doing more, but it's okay. You know, we can also build other, you know, entities that can contribute towards that facilitation of making sure that Black women-owned businesses are at the forefront of employment creation, are at the forefront of really changing the path and trajectory for South Africa. You know, And I want to really lean into that. And I'm also passionate about youth. And I'm saying, what is it that we can do for our young people? Because in everything we need to think about the intergenerational mix that we bring into our conversations, that we bring into the businesses that we want to set up, the platforms that we want to set up. So for us, with the digital bank, it's about young women. It's about we want them to be at the forefront of actually being decision makers and being in those spaces, and we'll be there just, you know, obviously supporting them strategically and making those strategic, sort of investments and decision making. But we want to make sure that whatever play it is, it's an intergenerational play, because I do think that there's a lot to be said in terms of how we've treated our young people. We've really not taken them with us and actually give them the confidence. We believe in you. We want you to be leaders. We want you to lead from the forefront. And so whether you talk social entrepreneurs like Nhlanhla Lux, who's my hero right now, in Soweto is phenomenal. Whether you talk about others that are out there doing great things in their communities, doing great things in the economy. How do we applaud that? How do we support that? And actually make sure that, we can also have icons and enterprises in townships, in rural communities that we can say, you know what, we've put our blood and sweat into this, because that's what Tata Madiba's generation did. They gave it their all for us to enjoy the freedom and the liberties that we are privileged to be in today. And so, I think the future is exciting. I'm excited about it. And I'm so honored that I've had this conversation with you. And I'd love us to go for coffee. It would be great.
Yes. I'm looking forward to the bank, because I'm so tired of being offered short-term loans as a Black woman. I need sustainable funding.
Absolutely. So definitely. It would just be great to connect. When you have time, please let me know. It would be great
I'll hijack you one of these days.
Awesome. Great. Thank you
so much. Send my love to Uma. Please apologize for me.
I will profusely.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of A Woman Belongs. We had an amazing conversation with Peggy-Sue Khumalo. Until next time, but remember, you belong where you are. You belong wherever you want to be.